Hi, this is Paul, and didn't have any time for the big bumper this morning. I was over listening to Luke's live stream, which is still going on over on Luke's channel in Grail Country, and T Grog is in the room, and Chad is in the room, and Claire was in the room, and the corner is doing its thing. It's working exactly as designed. Chad sort of blew things up yesterday, and people are making amends and getting their stuff out. And oh yeah, it's doing its thing. And Luke is doing his thing, and T Grog is doing his thing. So all those folks will be joining us. They'll be joining us momentarily, I'm sure, in the hive mind. But welcome, Embody, and thank you all for joining us today. I thought for this Friday morning live stream, we're starting an hour earlier for the sake of the East Coast denizens who have other things to do in their life. But I've been reading They Flew, and I recommended it to Kale, and he read it, and it's been a great book. We're all sort of waiting on Rod Dreer's book on Reenchantment too. I don't know if he's ever found a publisher for that.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. So, but this is, I think, a good topic. It was sort of initiated by Brett Weinstein's recent Third Man conversation. I did a video on that, and it's sort of in the corner been prompted by a lot of the conversations around meta-modernity with, see, part of my dyslexia always makes me want to get Brendan Graham Dempsey's name rearranged, but so
BGD, just
yes.
called BGD.
He had a great conversation with Boss and Aaron over in Europe. I really have to get Boss on for a proper randos conversation. And of course, my conversation with Roy Clauser is dropping, and Roy Clauser sort of mixes all sorts of things. So, and while I was talking about this, Bethel over on Twitter, she was working on a live on a Substack with respect to angels, and pulled in some video of a woman that I had seen some of her videos because she was kind of big into the whole angel thing. And so I thought, boy, we could wrap all this stuff together, and it'd make a good live stream for today. So I thought maybe to start out, we could have Bethel, who's not a stranger to the corner. We could have Bethel talk about her Substack that she just published. And it is part of her paid Substack group, but I'm sure she will be disclosing these Gnostic ideas that she has behind the Substack paywall to the very special listeners this morning. So thank you all for coming. And Bethel, why did you write a Substack about angels?
Yes, my secret sacred Substack.
Touche.
Yeah. Well, I was really interested by this new video that Brett and Heather did. I just love watching them, like you, Paul.
Me too.
They're so cute. Brett is such a great guy, heart of gold. And, we've been following him for a few years now as he talks about this whole, literally false, metaphorically true thing. So a lot of what they said isn't really new. It's kind of, just repeating stuff that he's already said. But they were bringing in angels specifically, and I thought it was just a really interesting window on how Brett thinks about a religious worldview, or like what he assumes, how he assumes religious people think about these things.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a good opportunity to maybe clarify some misunderstandings. Not that I speak for all theists or all Christians, but this is how I think about this kind of thing, and I'm not sure that Brett is even aware that there are a variety of ways to think about these things. And I had not heard of the third man phenomenon before, so it was really interesting for me to look up the story of Ernest Shackleton, and then like this whole sort of history of psychological lore, how this is kind of passed into medical research. But is it just medical? Is it just scientific? There are all these theories. And, I think we can get into this in a little more depth, but the key thing that I kind of shaped the Substack around is this idea that you can be a Christian and still believe that there's a natural order. You can still believe that there's a way that things generally are that we can study scientifically, because that's a big worry that Brett and Heather seems to have, this kind of angst, like, well, if you're religious, then what happens to science? You can't do science. All ability to predict goes out the window, because once you allow the divine foot in the door, then literally anything could happen. How do you know what God's going to wake up and do tomorrow? You don't. So much for the whole scientific enterprise. And I want to alleviate their concerns. I don't think that's true. Christians can do science too. And this is because the whole point of the miraculous is it disrupts the regular, disrupts the normal. If there were no natural order, there couldn't even be evidence for a miracle. And the sort of dark side of this, where I get into the angels in particular, and this kind of intense discussion that people are having with that lady who wrote her book about angels. People are, they're basically touching on the problem of evil, right? Why do terrible things happen? Why do people just die with no angels around to save them? And isn't it rather unfair to spread these happy, fluffy stories, feel-good stories about angels when so many people don't have an angel? But in the same way, I do believe in angels. I just don't think they're always swooping in to save people. And again, just like with a miracle in general, we couldn't even have evidence for angels in a world where the bad thing never happened, right? The whole point is sometimes the bad thing happens, but just occasionally, by the grace of God, for his own reasons, it doesn't. So that's a kind of a loose, a quick and dirty frame for my piece. Oh, you're on mute, Paul. We can't hear you.
Grizz will get you. Grizz will get you.
I put all the little corn ears.
Yeah, corn ears.
So I put 5 gifted memberships out there in the Hive Mind. So if you want a free membership to the channel, grab them now. But it only gives you the randos, doesn't give you the coveted no wait, no ads level where you get to see the whole Klauser episode. But it strikes me, Bethel, a couple of things. Number one, C.S. Lewis's book on miracles deals with a lot of these issues right off the bat, because these issues have been around a long time. The suspicion that, well, if first of all, if God breaks the rules, then the rules don't matter. And Lewis sort of walks through that and says it's hardly the case. I think a lot of this comes from sort of the bumping up against. So I introduced Klauser to Ezekiel Kaufman and his whole concept in the early 20th century of the meta-divine realm, and understanding almost all paganism in terms of there's these set of rules above the gods, and the gods themselves are better at magic than people. It facilitates magic and all of that. And so then, but what you sort of nicely see when you set these things side by side is that, oh, okay, so there are these trade-offs in these worldviews that we're talking about. And if you have sort of a modernistic version of the meta-divine realm, which is deism, then God again is another creature within creation, and he has more magic. And I mean, and I think part of where much older worldviews, and I think a more biblical worldview, just sees creation as basically as God completely governs creation. And so, but that then sets up the problem of evil. And I think the real problem with people's, I think for many people, the emotional problem with these kinds of stories and angels and miracles is they just seem unfair.
It's the scandal of particularity. Yeah,
That's
and
right.
I use that phrase, which you've used as well. It's
Who
right.
am I? Right? Who am I that might?
Or who are you? You got an angel and I didn't. What's so special about you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, he says that. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed. I went back and re-listened to it actually. And he's talking early on about this, the third man syndrome, and he's almost talking like the psalmist, like, who am I that this force would care so much about me? I mean, it's eerily similar to the language of the scriptures. I believe that's the Psalms, right? So, and in the way that he talks about Darwinian evolution, I mean, I grabbed a little bit of it here. He says, he talks early on about this force, right? And he says, I believe in the power. This is a quotation of Brett right now. I believe in the power of this Darwinian evolutionary force to shape things like psychology.
That's
right?
A creed right there.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's an absolute article of belief. And so I would have asked him, and again, politely, and I'm like you, Bethel, I have probably, I mean, maybe I have probably listened to more of Brett and Heather than anybody I know. I'm certainly there are people in the corner. I'm up until about a month and a half to 2 months ago, I listened to every episode. Like every episode was just part of my routine. I would listen to it. And I want to ask him nicely, why, like, what do you think we mean when we're talking about God? And what do you actually mean by this force? And I know, they'll be very quick to say, well, we're just talking in metaphorical terms. It's like, maybe we should go there a little bit,
right.
And think a little bit more deeply and less strawman-y about what these things mean. And so it's just striking to me that it's easier to believe in some sort of force that is agentic but not agentic.
Or well, maybe the way I would put it is it's agentic, but it doesn't always act the way I want it to.
Right. That's right.
Well, I think we are, and C.S. Lewis again gets at this in Miracles, at least in the Democratic side. We are ardently committed to a vision of the universe that is democratic.
Mm-hmm.
We hate the idea of privilege.
Yep.
And now, in biblical terms, the Bible is, now I'm going to use the word compatibilist here, but I'm using it within a smaller reference. The Bible is tremendously compatibilistic with respect to many of these things. On one hand, God seems absolutely within his right to pick favorites. On the other hand, it says that he judges fairly between people. And these are two ideas that we wrestle with, because we are at least how we suppose the world should be managed. This is deep in our idea of justice and fairness, that basically it's karma, it's sowing and reaping. You get what you sow. Yet we all want second chances. And in fact, I'm watching this getting played out now between, let's say, the immanentizing of Peterson and Peugeot and certain Orthodox people who basically see everything as, well, salvation is doing the right things and reaping the rewards of those right things.
How is that not a prosperity gospel 3.0?
That's right. Because, and so on one hand, if that is a meritocratic universe purely that way, you also then bump into the fact that, as nice as the Declaration of Independence says, all men are created equal, well, some are more equal than others. LeBron James, look at him. I mean, basketball, the guy was made for it. He was built for it. It's in his DNA. It's, and beauty and brilliance. I mean, there's very little equal about the genetic selection that Brett and Heather are sort of working in.
Well, then take, if you don't mind me going in here. I mean, think about what strikes me about these stories, certainly even more so of Joseph of Cupertino, more so than Teresa of Avila. I mean, is one of the scandals that he kind of represents or embodies is like, this guy's an absolute idiot. I mean, he is he's the guy on your roster. If you're a teacher, like, he's the guy who kind of sets you like, okay, am I going to give Joseph an F or a D-? Like every time. Right. And so, but
Yeah, tell a little bit about Joseph.
Yeah, if you could, because I haven't read this book, and so if you could, like, give me
you must read this book, Bethel. You must.
Yeah, you'll eat it up. It's really fantastic, and and I, full disclosure, I just finished Reformations about a week and a half ago, and so I was sort of all, I'm sort of in Ayer's head, right, or whatever. I'm in his world that he's sort of put together. And I want to put in a plug. I know I've tweeted a lot about this, but I absolutely believe you should read Reformations. It's really as good as Paul has talked about.
Yeah,
it's wonderful. Book. It's and don't worry, wherever you find yourself, you sort of however many 100 years past the events of that are depicted. It's like, it's not about sides. It's not about like scoring points. It's really way smarter and better, and maybe even winsome about those things.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so I picked up this book because I wanted to talk to Paul about Reformations, and Paul's like, yeah, that's good, but man, you need to get on this They Flew bandwagon. So I did, and so the story of Joseph of Cupertino, of course, is he's a young, pious young man, not very gifted, from a very, I guess we would just call like lower class home. I mean, he's, maybe a step above a peasant, but working class parents, one of several children. And he has an uncle or two. He's two uncles, actually, who are Franciscan friars. And so this is part of that moment historically. And the Franciscans were sort of the hot thing.
And it's at the beginning. It's post-Reformation. It's at the beginning of the Enlightenment. That's really key in this story, that a lot of this weird stuff sort of breaks out at the beginning of the Enlightenment. It's like, that's super interesting.
Right. And so, it's always these transitions between epochs and worldviews, Weltanschauungs, whoever you want to call that, right? And so anyway, he wants to become a one kind of Franciscan, and they're like, they try him out, and he literally cannot do the dishes. Sorry, Paul, and drink, everybody in the chat. He can't do the dishes, but he's incredibly earnest, and so they send him away, and he goes through this sort of rough, like, what am I going to do with my life? I mean, he just can't do anything. And finally, he just sort of clicks, and he gets his way in, and he's allowed to sort of study, and he's going to this pivotal exam. And the way that this was set up back in the day, and there's some similarity still today, when you are you go through your studies, and then you come, the bishop, or the one who will do the ordination, will come and kind of do a general sort of exam of everyone. And so he's going to fail. He's going to fail. And so something happens at the last minute. The bishop is going to be called away. And so he interviews one of the smart kids in the room. He's like, well, you guys all seem to be very, very well prepared, so we're all going to do it. So you all get ordained. And so he does. So he becomes, a priest. And his Latin is terrible. I mean, all the kind of things, it's just like but anyway, but he's incredibly holy and incredibly pious. And so then his sort of these strange things start happening to him, like, really against his will. And I think that's a sort of an interesting part of this story too. It's like, and this is even more so the case with Saint Teresa of Avila, who is probably a little bit more well known of a saint, but did not. But anyway, started levitating and bilocating and all kinds of crazy stuff. And these are witnessed events, right? These are things that this is not
by hundreds of people.
Yeah, right. I mean, over spans of years here,
and people are like, "Where's the evidence?" It's like, there's no lack of evidence, and especially the reaction to the church to him. The church just does not know what to do with this poor guy.
Well, in fact, not only do they not know what to do with him, is that they find it kind of almost kind of gauche, almost kind of like, this is kind of unseemly, man. Like the Protestants are really going to rag on us now, kind of thing. And so there's this move to hide him, like to send him away. After he's witnessed doing all these crazy things. And I think the story that I got from the book is that the Inquisition was really unhappy about these things and was very serious about kind of policing the wild facts, these strange things. And so he and so anyway, so that's the sort of the basic story. And of course, this became a sensation. The Pope saw him levitate. A famous or a an important German duke, one of the Protestant dukes, came to see it because wanted to see it for himself, and what is it called? Converts as a result of this, and so it's all just very weird. It's all very strange. It's wild, as a matter of fact. But to your point, Paul, when people ask you for the evidence, it's like, well, look, it would be as silly as somebody saying, well, what's your evidence that Donald Trump was president? Like, well, what do you mean evidence? I mean, right? And now I think people would be like, well, there's video evidence of, but it's a silly thing. It's a silly
thing. And so I think what's good for, first of all, Carlos Ayer is a Yale scholar.
Yep.
I mean, there's no impeaching his credentials as a historian.
Mm-hmm.
And he approaches this book in a way that secular skeptical historians are going to have to deal with it. And there's some videos out here of him doing some book events with respect to this book. And it's just fascinating watching the audience splinter among the worldviews. And it completely illustrates C.S. Lewis's point at the beginning of the Book of Miracles. You have to see events through a worldview. And in some ways, the world is big enough and weird enough that all worldviews are stretched or eventually fudge with respect to all kinds of things that we know and see, and all kinds of things that happen. So in some ways, the best worldview can actually accommodate the most facts, or the most, no matter how inconvenient and awkward. And now in the internet age, this is kind of where we're at, because we're just getting bombarded with more and more evidence. Now you can just sort of close yourself off. And Kale, you had a tweet that was terrific, I thought, because it basically what happens is that your worldview acts like this filter.
Yeah.
And so it's going to let some things in, and it's going to exclude other things. And the things that it excludes, it's first going to try to sort of justify within the worldview. And so with the third man thing, and it was fascinating watching Brett kind of work this through, and many others on the internet. Well, this is a psychological phenomenon.
Right.
Okay, well, how about when other people see the person, or when they do something like apply a tourniquet? I mean, psychological phenomena can get you a long ways, but when you actually show up in the hospital with a tourniquet on, my psyche didn't produce that to the best of our scientific knowledge.
Right. So when Brett is talking about, the adaptive advantages of these kinds of things, it's like, it's just simply not enough for what he's trying to get it to do. And look, what he's trying to do, he's doing world frame maintenance. Or he's doing frame maintenance and frame servicing more than anything. And he will tell you that he's dedicated to the truth. But as one of those Jordan Peterson videos from several weeks back, and I forget the guy's name, is a scientific materialist guy that he was interviewing. And he basically said, well, like, what if if you saw X, Y, or Z, he said, well, then I wouldn't see. He just admits that there's no evidence that is that could be produced that would make him think that miracles couldn't happen. It's like, well, then who's the religious one then? Right. In other words, who is operating under oppressive dogmas then?
That's exactly right. The dogmas, your dogmas are the filter through which you see the world. And psychologically, we know this. But then when we hit these weird cases, and so, part of what was really interesting about the book was, well, you watch the Roman Catholic hierarchy just kind of trying to deal with it. And of course, they're in this death match with Protestantism. And for the most part, the Protestant line is, this is demonic. And well, but you're really hard pressed to make that case with someone like Joseph of Cupertino or Teresa of Avila, who are, they actually themselves are trying to suppress these things.
Yeah, they're reluctant. Grimm asked in the scroll here a few minutes ago, both of them, were moved, right? I think the way that it's described is so that he's drawn to something and he has this sort of this ecstatic moment. He's not like trying to say, okay, I'm going to fly now. This is not like hey, like watch this trick. It's not done in the idiom of a magic trick.
No,
like, oh, now I see it, and it's not like that. And in fact, it's not even like a pressing a button. Oftentimes, it was in the midst of mass. It was in the midst of some sort of like chant or prayer, right? So it's and a source of genuine embarrassment, even for Joseph. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm being a little bit mean to the great Joseph of Cupertino. He was not a very bright man, but he wasn't retarded. In other words, okay, right. But in other words, he knew exactly what was going on. He knew that this was a little bit embarrassing.
Well, and Bethel, you sent me this delightful video. I think part of what we face is often this comes to us in packages that are easily dismissible. So you sent me a very interesting video in which Douglas Murray appears on a UK show. Why don't you talk about this woman a little bit?
Right. Okay. So, and I have some thoughts about Cupertino as well, because I've now bought the book and I was skimming the chapter while Kale was
You're a fast read.
I didn't read the whole thing, but I got the gist of it, and I have thoughts, but I'll bracket those and talk about this big questions video that I sent. So yeah, this is from good while ago, like 15 years ago or so. So yes, we have baby Douglas Murray. He's very cute, and he is very, very skeptical because this lady, this Irish mystic seer, she's just written a best-selling book which is all about her life with the angels, and she claims that she's able to see guardian angels all day, every day, hovering around every single person. And so she's just speaking very matter-of-factly about everything that she could see. She said, oh yes, I see all of you have angels and they're very happy with you all, and Douglas has an angel, is very pleased with him, and that kind of thing. And she has no hint of self-consciousness or embarrassment at all, and everyone's just kind of staring at her. And so the host goes, Douglas, what do you make of all this? And Douglas goes, well, I think it's a very good idea for a book. Which is why your book is on the bestseller list, and mine isn't. And so he's it's kind of harsh. But then Douglas gets a little more serious, and he says, look, it's dangerous because people are afraid of death, and people can be credulous, and it's dangerous to give false hope to credulous people. And so, he very clearly thinks this woman is a fraud. I think that, with the liar, lunatic, Lord, if we did a Lewisian trilemma here, I think that Douglas leans towards liar. And I have to admit, I do too, as I read this woman's memoir, because it's just, there's no room for a fourth option there. It's too detailed. She talks about like these lengthy back and forth conversations that she has. She tells you exactly what the angels look like, what they're doing. And, you can also look up various things she says that the angels have told us. And this is something else I get into in my piece, which is I don't just have an amorphous belief in weird stuff, in supernatural stuff. I'm a Christian, okay, specifically. And so what that means is that I have a filter, right? And so if your angels are telling me, they told you to tell us that all humans are basically good, that all religions are equal. Oh, and by the way, we should stop fracking. That's something else that she's out there saying. The angels said, I guess. Then I'm sorry, but the angels did not tell you these things. And I know that because I'm a Christian. I know that people are not basically good. I know that not all religions are equal. Now, it's possible, and you mentioned the demonic, maybe she was in touch with something else. I don't know about that. But I think she just still has a grift, and she's been working it. So, that's what I lean towards, but it's a very fun video, as you say. It's very lively. I liked this show. It's this big kind of lively conversation of the round and people arguing with each other. And there's a vicar who gets very passionate and kind of agrees with Douglas, actually. But there's another guy besides Lorna who shares his own stories, but I'll let people, you can link the video, people can go and watch that. But so Yeah, I mean, I think the more detailed these stories get, the more limited our options become. Because it just like Lewis says, at a certain point, you don't have the option of, well, this person is just honestly mistaken. It's kind of a binary or maybe a trinary choice.
I'm just curious as to why you're so confident in your epistemology, Bethel.
In what way?
You just said this is true because you're a Christian.
Well,
sorry.
So what I'm saying is that Christianity it's a holistic worldview, right? It's consistent, and so
but it's also really weird.
Well, of course it is, but the point that I'm making is just that I think that when Brett and Heather talk about religious people, right? What do religious people think? It's sort of low resolution and vague. And so I'm kind of like bringing some more content into it that okay, but as a Christian specifically, I think it's false. Certain things are false, right? It's false that all religions are equal, right? And so this is a way, the Bible talks about testing the spirits, right? So it gives us a way to test or to filter. And so it's not that I have a blanket resistance to angels or to the miraculous. I'm not a skeptic in that sense. I'm interested in these stories, and it's not that I will laugh at it and dismiss it out of hand because it's supernatural and I would accept the supernatural. It's that this particular supernatural thing doesn't pass my smell test theologically. It's a more theological thing, which would be kind of alien to Brett and Heather. But that
are we talking about this Irish woman right now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah,
okay.
But I mean, I also have in a similar way, I could talk about Cupertino and why I'm not sure what to think there either.
You would have been in good company with the Inquisition,
right? I mean, maybe, which is kind of interesting. But I mean, one point I want to bring in with the Cupertino story, as I was skimming along here, is like a number of these intense mystics, saints. There's a very strong element of self-harm in his story. So you look
mortifications
back, and like he's flagellating himself, he's torturing himself, right? And I think this is a problem, and I'm disturbed when some Catholics can almost fetishize that, right? And they think about it, they talk about it, it's like of a piece with this intensifying holy mystical thing, like, oh, they were so holy, they flagellated themselves. It's like, is that a good thing? I'm not so sure that it is. I think we should be more careful with that kind of thing, because it's a sign of a very disturbed person.
We'll steel man that for a second. I mean, why do you think several months back we got into an interesting conversation about sex negativity and sex positivity, and one of my takeaways from that conversation, I think it was with Laura, Paul, right, and
Sam.
maybe it's Sam, yeah. And one of the things that I took away from that conversation is that I have these things in my own head as a faithful Christian in 2024, that I think are obviously true, and I've become a little allergic to that word obvious, because as I sort of poke around more, these things that I think are obvious are really not so obvious. And so, and I know we're not talking about sex negativity and sex positivity, but I want to, I don't want to, flagellate myself. I don't want to, I mean, look at me, I'm not exactly wasting away here. But I want to know, why was it not obviously crazy, right? And I just think I'm trying to teach myself to be a little bit more circumspect when it comes to these issues of I mean, we're told that prayer and fasting are real, and important, and sometimes like absolutely necessary to chase out the angels. No, I know. And look, I read those stories too, and I'm like, God, the guy's like, that's so extreme, and so I'm not trying to say that you're crazy for saying that. I wanted to get us to think a little bit. Maybe we are the ones who have a perspective that has become unmoored from something essential, I'm not recommending that we all go out and do those things, but like, what are we missing?
I don't know, Kale. What are we missing?
Well, we're bodies, right?
Sure.
And I think that modern contemporary Christianity in all of its varieties, even you ortho friends, we have a problem with the body. We are all modernists, really, and we're all trying to LARP our way back into something more embodied. And the scandal of Cupertino and Avila are that there's some strange connection between their holiness and devotion and their bodies flying. And again, I know it sounds utterly crazy to anybody, but there it is. And I think what it points to is we all have a kind of default materialist frame, even us. And so when you read something like, Ayer's book, it makes me question my faith in what I think is obvious.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to interject again, like for me at least, I really don't think it's materialism in particular that's making me pause, because I would have no. I wouldn't really hesitate that much at all over a lot of things that would be very shocking to a materialist worldview. With levitation in particular, so then we're like moving into the realm of things that supposedly were publicly witnessed and recorded. It is, I do find it interesting, this bit where it says that there's primary source material that talks about it almost like a police report, like this very sort of matter-of-fact way. I'm interested in that because that's sort of connected to my research, my mom's research on like what the Gospels look like, what kind of text they are, what kind of testimony it is. I guess I would be interested to look at the primary sources there. At the same time, I have with something like levitation, I do worry that it, so again, thinking about my filter for miracles, one question I ask is this trivial? Now, you could say, Kale, well, trivial is relative, right? What seems trivial may be trivial to you as a modern person, but not trivial to somebody back then. And maybe, but I mean, I guess I'm always asking why. Like, why? Okay, what's the point? What's the purpose? I ask the same for demonic stuff as well, like stories about poltergeists. I would ask, well, why? Why would Satan randomly break a window and then do nothing else? What's the purpose there? What's the point? Not because I don't believe in angels and demons. To the contrary, I do believe in angels and demons. I do believe in God, but I also think because I think they're persons, I think of them as, well, that they must have a motive. There must be reasons why they act the way that they do, right? The same way I would think about people, about anybody. And so I guess I would want to ask, why would God want Cupertino to levitate?
But this is exactly the same question we have to deal with. So I loved it because the truth is, again, as a pastor, I know this. I have enough of these stories that come to me. So here's Christopher. He's been in the corner long enough that we know his name. He doesn't show up on live streams to my knowledge. He hasn't. When I was 4, my 6-year-old brother fell off a cliff. 2 men showed up and carried us back home, then disappeared. To this day, we all report these men look completely different to each other. Now, that's a fairly that's sort of a type of story like this, and you can find stories like this without a lot of difficulty, and you'll find them on TV. They're sort of rehashed and touched by an angel.
Right. And if I could just interject, that's not a trivial story.
No, it's not a trivial story.
And so I take that seriously, and I would want to know more about it. I also have it. So a dear old family friend read my Substack, and he just emailed me this morning. He's got a couple of stories from his own. Now, he didn't see anybody, but he believes that he was, miraculously protected. Like, he ran a red light on his bike and got hit by a car and flew into the air. And he said it felt like he was being held and like gently lowered to the ground. He was okay. The bike was totaled. The bike didn't have an angel, but he was fine. And so he firmly believes that was an angel. And I think he could be totally right. Again, though, not a trivial story. It's not just kind of, it doesn't have that random quality. He was possibly going to die, and then he didn't die.
Right.
And so I can well believe that God sends angels to help us in those moments.
Right.
Sometimes.
Now, because you've all fallen into my great plot that I've been working for 7 years to put you into my Calvinist worldview, where basically God gets to do things beyond what our little thin schemes of justification permit.
Well, I believe that too, even though I'm an Arminian. So that
but one of the great things about Carlos's book is that he picks a couple of things to focus on, which are levitation and bilocation, two things which are really going to stress materialists, because there's no way, levitation, pretty cut and dried, that for the most part, gravity works. He also picks a couple of things that are really going to stress sort of the camps out there. And for this very reason, Bethel, is it seems, and especially levitation in terms of its historical significance, in that early levitations tended to be like Simon Magus. Simon Magus, reportedly was someone who could fly. And of course, this impressed people and everyone. And we know Simon Magus actually appears in the Bible, has a confrontation with Peter, which he loses.
Yep.
And then there's like zero levitations. And because the Christian church could basically all dismiss levitation as, this is of the devil, this is demonic. And then you have these saints. And as Kale noted, there's some really interesting particularities to this when you start digging down into the details. You're sort of hard pressed to say that Teresa of Avila or Joseph of Cupertino are in some way demonic. Now, if let's say you're an ardent reformer, you could say, well, of course they're demonic because the Pope is the Antichrist, and all of these people are evil, and so we can just wash our hands of the whole thing. But at this point of view, we read back and it's like, you're really hard pressed to say, and then you look at a whole bunch of other things. And what I want to point out is what we sort of have to, and what we naturally do, and I think we have to see some of our own worldview in this. What we tend to do immediately is sort of mechanize. We sort of have to rush in with a mechanistic worldview to explain and account for this story. That's not an unhealthy thing. I think we do it naturally as human beings, but it's in that region of explanation that I think we usually sort of get tripped up, because what we want to do is sort of democratize the world and say, okay, here's the path, and here's the path to levitation. It's also the path to sanctification, because in this case, they're sort of told in the same way. These people are beatified. They are now held up by the church as examples to be. But what's interesting, again, and I'm glad
you mentioned, they're buried, Paul. They're buried.
Well, and then they're like, their corpses don't rot. Like Teresa.
No. I mean that too, but like they're buried from the public view. Like, in other words, they weren't running. I mean, look, if you want to believe the sort of the magisterial Protestant critique of the church, you would think then this would be precisely the point in which you would charge admission so you could fund the building of St. Peter's.
Yeah, exactly. Because he drew crowds. People wanted to see this dude.
Wealthy people, like,
yes,
well-heeled
they paid.
people.
And talk about pay to play. They paid to watch, because he levitated so reliably. That was the thing about him. He couldn't see a church or say the Virgin Mary's name or get through the mass while staying on the ground. And everybody knew this about this guy. But again, and this is the strange things about Joseph of Cupertino and Teresa of Avila. I mean, Teresa of Avila begged and begged and begged God, please stop the freaky stuff. I just want to be holy. I just want to love you. I love our rapturous encounters, but could you please just keep me on the floor? And that's why the other nuns would pile on her and they would all go for a ride. I mean, you read these stories and they're just incredible. But now, so now we are in the position of, we have to frame this. And this is where things get interesting. What I found particularly interesting, Bethel, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. Right before this, I was on to the stream with T-Grog and the Luke stream. And so T-Grog is this ardent, deconstructed materialist. I mean, he talks all of the new atheist points. But basically what he says is the real problem I have with all of this nice Christian stuff about living life after death and going to heaven and all of this stuff is it's dangerous. It leads
That's kind of what Douglas is saying.
Yeah. It leads the simple into false hope.
Mm.
And now, again, what's so interesting, I find interesting about the Joseph of Cupertino thing is that levitations just sort of seem to pick up at some point and have sort of trailed off, but there's Padre Pio and there's some bilocations, contemporary ones. And I mean, I can see why you Catholics have a lot of fun with this stuff. And it also tortures you because almost always these kinds of things are, on one hand, fascinating, but they're also uncanny. And they almost always sort of break frame in one way or another. And Bethel, I'm glad you mentioned the mortifications, the hair shirts, the renunciation. I mean, Joseph of Cupertino nearly fasts himself to death. And again, it's so simple. And you saw this, of course, in certain forms of Catholicism that, in fact, have gone away. I dare bet that in most mainstream Catholic monasteries, nobody is fasting themselves in a way that would confuse somebody who's anorexic.
Yeah, or flagellating themselves.
Right. These things have changed, which is interesting in and of themselves. Because again, I need to scaffold this, and I need to put it into a story so that, if Grim Grizz really wants to levitate, here's the Joseph of Cupertino thing. But again, so now I got to own my worldview. So Sunday we were having worship and we were singing and, those of you who are Christians probably know what I mean. I'm really into the worship. I'm really into the song. And then I had this thought. What if, so I'm probably not having the length of rapture that Joseph or Teresa of Avila have. They were sort of, they were athletes in this. I'm just an amateur. And I was thinking, what would happen if I levitated at this moment? And it really isn't sort of about me, because the question is, what on earth would that do to my church? What on earth? Because word would get out. It always does.
Well, I mean, look what happened a year and a half ago. What was that college where there was sort of these charismatic, ecstatic experiences, and everybody was flocking to it. Yeah. We were talking about this in the corner like a year and a half ago, weren't we?
Yeah. And now, Bethel, to your point about this Irish woman, I've known a number of people like her. I'm not ready to say she's a liar or a grifter. She might be. But there's another woman. I had a Randall's conversation with her. I just saw her when I was in the UK last time. She came to our meetup. She came to our estuary meeting. And she, when she was on my channel with that, I mean, another Irish woman. The pattern is developing here. Sorry to the Irish. But, she has these visions. God talks to her. And again, I have a lot of experience with mentally ill people. And, no, she can hold down a marriage. She can keep house. She can have children. But she also has fantastical stories.
Well, this Irish woman also has a story of a marriage and a family. It's so, you might wonder if she's schizophrenic or something, but I don't think so. She seems otherwise, of sound mind. But I think what concerns me is when I get into the details, it's the content of it. It's the, again, I use the word triviality. It's, the sort of stuff that she's saying the angels are saying to her. Just thinking, I'm like, no, they didn't. Like, that's the angels would not have said that. That it's just. It's just false.
I have those filters too, because And if you're in a Pentecostal church, actually, in some kind of Pentecostal churches, you deal with this all the time, because there's a whole bunch of people having visions and hearing from God. And
I got a word.
I want to bring up this other book, which I read a number of years ago, which is really a good book on this subject. So Barbara Ehrenreich is a secularist materialist who also has, or had, or maybe still has, I don't know, wild visions. And so what's really fascinating about this book is and this is a New York Times bestseller, a lot of people read this book, is she has to wrestle with this, because she has these visions involuntarily, and she's very sane. She also wrote Nickel and Dimed, another very famous book about poverty in the 80s. But, and so part of, to give Brett and Heather a little bit of credence, this happens to people. I mean, it just does. Now, again, as you say, Bethel, at some point, you can't just completely withhold judgment. You're going to have to maintain a worldview, because we all have to maintain one. But I think a lot of it is, okay, so as a Protestant, what do I do with Joseph of Cupertino? As a Christian, what do I do with Barbara Ehrenreich? As a Protestant, what do I say with, and what is it with the Irish? Is it years of potatoes, famine, and alcohol that have sort of I mean, Brett Weinstein maybe would talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to the point, going back specifically to the self-harm stuff with Cupertino. What do I do with Cupertino? I would tell him to stop.
well, his superiors did.
I think they were right.
The abbot said, "This is crazy. Stop it." So he's like, "Okay."
Yeah, I think.
But just a quick note. Sorry, I'm remembering the narrative. Like the takeaway, and again, this is a very Catholic thing, and so I know it's going to be coded to your ears in a certain way. But like
my Protestant ears. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I mean, we're all Protestant.
She's an Anglican. She's in the middle somewhere.
We're all Protestant, Paul. Stop.
Via media, baby. Yeah.
I just edited. You should all be proud of me right now. Okay, no, but that both with Teresa and with Joseph of Cupertino and with Sora Maria de Agreda, they were in part blessed because of their willingness to obey their superiors and salute to the proper authority. Like there was this a real kind of through line here about that your abbot has authority over you, and and there's and again that would makes total sense in a sort of a Catholic imaginary, because it's all about the authority that will eventually sort of scale on up to the Pope, right? So that it was a blessing for their willingness to submit to the proper authority, So anyway, I wanted to inject that. I just remembered that was part of the narrative.
Also, in the moment, and it seems like these floating saints are in so much rapture. Their mind are not there. They're floating. I mean, people would play with them. They would sort of, blow on them or poke on them or put candles up to them to see if they could sort of break the trance. And
move them around.
Right. But when their superior would order them down in that moment, down they would come. And of course, within this worldview is validation of the hierarchy.
Right.
Even though they couldn't sort of order them to stop in general, they only could be. And again, now this is our mechanical culture. We are constantly looking for the system. Because I think deep in our hearts, what we really want, and this I think is, now I'm revealing again my Calvinism, deep in our hearts, what we really want is to be God. Because if I can understand the system, if I can control the system, if I can wield the system, then what?
Yeah, the Weinsteins always talk about that as like, what happens if we actually get the source code? both of the brothers talk about this, here and there about it. And like, they, of course, are deeply skeptical about the human condition. And so their concern is that we do not need the source code. If we get the source code, it is bad. Right. So, which again is one of the reasons why I like the guys. So anyway. Sorry, Bethel.
Bethel, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I just, that is an interesting detail I missed, that he could come down by order of the superior. And I mean, I think the phrase you used just there is telling. It validates the Catholic magisterium, right? It validates the Catholic authority. And this is another piece of my filter, right? With these kinds of reports, are these things taking place in a context that seems designed to validate a particular establishment system? We're going to use the word system, or was it anti-establishment? Now, I mean, it sounds like that the Inquisition didn't know what to do with it, and so maybe there's conflicting things there.
Well, that was what's so fascinating about the story. On one hand, certain people saw this and are like, wow, we finally have this club against the Protestants. And then in the hagiographies and in sort of the promotional press of the church and their war against the Protestants, I mean, these saints were a big deal. And then you had the story of the one Lutheran, you had the one Lutheran prince who flips and becomes Catholic because he sees him. So then, there are moments when it seems like the church wants to weaponize Joseph because he flew so reliably that, but then, and to me, this is really the ring of authenticity. Because in my experience, whenever you try to really weaponize something like this, it usually turns on you. So then they're just thinking, we can really weaponize them. But then they begin to realize they're doing it at the cost of their soul. So then they try to lock him away. And, how they treated this guy eventually was horrendous, at least according to our terms. And Carlos Air, because they just didn't know what to do with him. And to me, that is the ring of authenticity, and to me, people like, I don't know this lady, but people that I've known like her, who have visions, they have dreams. And again, when I listen to people with their pronouncements, well, I always do. I have my own categories here. And there was one woman who used to come to church. She lived in a group home, and she would tell me how God had told her that she was sent to the world to somehow bring peace between Jesus and Satan. And I thought, I was pretty skeptical. I was pretty skeptical about this, given everything else around her,
right?
And given her story,
given the content of that statement, right?
And I have those points too. But part of what I want to get at is very much, I think, in the line of Lewis, where and again, this is sometimes stretched too far. But where Lewis goes, obviously, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and trying to adjudicate, with Peter Lucy. About Lucy or Edmund, and so, and again, I think you have to be careful about sort of scaffolding all of this around. I read Joseph of Cupertino, and I'm sorry, Kale, I hate to disappoint some of our other Catholic friends here. No indication of me joining the Catholic Church anytime soon. I know I'm breaking Hank's heart, but here we are. But yeah, I also don't think that this is Catholic propaganda. It just doesn't read that way. The fact that Joseph of Cupertino, Teresa of Avila, I've heard about, a bunch of the other people I had heard about, but Joseph of Cupertino, and this is one of the points that Carlos Air makes. It's like, why doesn't anybody know this guy's story? And that's an interesting question. And again, part of the reality that most of us will say, the world is weirder than we think. Yeah, that's true. And people across the board will say that. But I think, especially now that we're in kind of the internet moment that we are, where we are going to be exposed, part of what's breaking down material naturalism, which is that there's just too much evidence to support this sort of locked in material universe. I think, and another nice thing about levitation is you can find it in Buddhists. I mean, you can find levitations. CW mentioned, autobiography of a yogi. I've got it down on my shelf there. I remember reading that for a while, and there's lots of weird stuff that happens. And again, the perennialists will employ it in a certain way. The tribalists will employ it in another way. But I think part of what's going to be important in this internet age is for us to be able to deal with the weird and the unfitting in a way that is both flexible but also responsible. And I think that's part of the reason I like bringing these things to the channel.
If I can just throw a name out there of a scholar who regularly comes up in these discussions. I don't know if either of you are that familiar with Dale Allison. Okay. Yeah. So Dale is a bit of a, he's kind of the new hotness, I guess, these days. His name comes up a lot. I see apologists trying to kind of interact with him and get him to sit at their table because he's the cool kid. And this is how apologists are. Anyway, he has a big book on the resurrection that gets cited a lot. And it's very well written. He's a very gifted guy. He's a very clever guy. And where he sort of lands at the end with all of this is he says, I'm wide open to all kinds of stuff. To all kinds of weird stuff, paranormal stuff, ghost stories. Bring me your ghost story. I want to hear it. I'll put it in my collection. He collects these things. So for him, the resurrection is another cool, weird thing that happened, right? And so he it's almost like the way that Buddhists think about God. They add it to their shelf full of gods, right? This is how Allison is with the resurrection, which he gets very, very twitchy when you try to insist that it was a physical bodily resurrection. He does not like that idea, but he might be okay with Jesus being kind of spirited away immediately and the disciples having a nice clean vision later. He's okay with that.
Like a drone trick or something. I mean,
like the church in Corinth. You can see my rough draft tomorrow.
I mean, he kind of mashes up the resurrection and the ascension, basically. And then he'll say, if the disciples, yeah, they did see something. I'm even willing to say they saw Jesus, just not the way that you evangelicals think they did. My way is cooler. I'm a cool kid. And so then I think if people can get excited about this, like, oh, look, here's Dale Allison. He's kind of a skeptical liberal scholar, but he agrees with us, sort of. And I'm like, well, no, not really, because Allison is doing this flattening thing where he does not want Christians to come and try to claim that they have better evidence for their weird thing than anybody else does. And so he'll talk about rainbow bodies. That's my mom did a deep dive into that, and you can look up her video that she did. And, I think it's maybe a Buddhist story I don't remember the details, but what you got there, what is that? I can't read okay.
And it's because somebody mentioned in the chat, I mean, this is just Matthew 1-8. I mean, and this is really good commentary. So keep going. He's a very credible New Testament scholar.
What's his name?
Dale Allison.
Oh, that's Allison's commentary. Okay, yeah, sorry. So yeah, right. He's a scholar, but what he's insisting on doing is leveling the playing field, and it's this problem. It's like Dash says in The Incredibles: if everyone is special, no one is, right? If everything is just equally weird and kind of interesting, then we have no filter. We have no way to weigh or compare these things or make a choice to pick one thing or the other. And that's fine with Dale, because Dale doesn't want to pick. He sort of likes having that buffet of weirdness. So
isn't that just a form? Is that a form of perennialism, do you think? Or
how would you define?
It's just the way that I hear Paul talk about it. It's like a sort of a grab bagism or something.
Yeah, exactly.
A buffet.
Right. And so that's why he's kind of hostile to Christian apologetics as an enterprise, or to Christian apologists, because he's like, no, stop it. You're doing it wrong. You just need to kind of accept that the world is really weird and stop trying to make the case for your particular weird thing. That's not how this works,
and it's interesting because perennialism, I mean, this movement sort of always emerges because, okay, well, but they say, well, we should escape these tribal we should escape these tribal structures, but then you just replace it with another structure with a bigger tribe, and ironically the perennialists always seem to be a minority position. Because the idea is that, well, perennialism will just kind of swallow the whole world and we'll stop having, but and part of my point with respect to Joseph of Cupertino is it's hard to fit someone like that in a perennialist for the same reasons you noted, Bethel, which is like, well, his practice of mortification, this is clearly unhealthy. Because it's clearly unhealthy because he almost dies a few times, and then that illegitimacy to his visions. Well, he's only having visions because he's starving himself, and if you starve yourself, you'll have visions. Yeah, that's true, but then most people who starve themselves don't levitate.
Right, and so there's multiple weird things going on with the Cupertino story. I mean, I guess to put a particularly Christian spin on that, like anybody can look at the self-harm and stuff and go, whoa, that's weird, that's not healthy. And then as a Christian, I am zooming in. Yes, this is actually the Church of St. Thomas. I think this is a picture I took myself, or did I take it myself? Anyway, the Church of St. Thomas in New York, lovely place. So the Christian spin specifically there is God does not want you to harm yourself. Like God wants you to take care of your body. Your body is a temple. God would never command you to flagellate yourself to the point that your whole body was like an open wound. I mean, like that's the description in there from one of the people who found it. He would never command you to starve yourself almost to death. That's not something God would command. So it's a little bit like.
But I would just insert here that that's a question of degree, really. I think you have to face that. I think the call to fasting is real. I think the call to mortification is real, and I think we're just arguing about intensity.
Yeah, right. I'm not.
Thank you, Father Eric. That's what I was thinking of. That's funny.
Well, I'm not blanket anti-fasting, although Jesus did, drink water. So, I agree to some extent with what you're saying, but it's sort of it's like the beard problem. Like, it's just because there are degrees to these things doesn't mean that there's no line, right, beyond which it crosses into self-abuse, and so I don't think God would command self-abuse, so this is a little bit like my drawing the line earlier, like, okay, I know 100% the angels would never say this, right? Then that's just like my prior, just like my I know with probability 1, this did not happen, right? Because of my frame.
You're talking about the Irish woman again.
Yeah, right. It's like some of the specific things that she claims to be passing on from the
synchronism,
angels, right?
Or something, some sort
exactly,
of
right. Yeah. Or Paul's story about this poor woman who believed that she was going to make peace between God and the devil. Like, bless her heart, she was confused, right? And we know she was confused with probability 1, right?
And there were other clear signs of her mental illness,
right?
And,
exactly.
She was, and again, but even the frame of mental illness, which I've poked at in my channel as well. I mean, these are. I think we have to, we do have to have a bit of humility with respect to all sorts of models. And that's now having complete humility with respect, or complete skepticism with respect to every model. Well, this is where you get into this. Well, there's your model. And so it's, no, I think these questions and issues are helpful. Now I've just dropped the chat in if somebody wants to come in and join us on here and raise some topics. I'm going to give priority to our 2 special guests over jump-ins, so I'll warn you about that. But I'm not, again, what we would really love out of this is a system. And I think what we are all doing with these conversations are continuing to recalibrate our systems
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a point that I make in the Substack is, yeah, I think what you're getting at is like control, predictability. It would be great if there was a science of miracles, right? But the whole point is that
I would just like
there
to
isn't one,
I would just like to continue to point out that you are putting yourself in the power position of the Inquisition. This is exactly that was their modus operandi. And again,
How did that work out?
Quite well, actually.
Well, and part of, part of what Air goes into then, because, okay, so then the Catholic Church had to figure out what was a miracle, because it's part of their beatification. Again, now
the whole canonization process.
Right. If you read Reformations, which is, another one of his great books, he points out that this arose basically in response to Protestantism. And part of what happened in the Catholic Church was a domestication and an institutionalization of the church in its response to Protestantism, because they had to, because now suddenly they had to. But again, the mode of justification was now different. And I think in that way, sort of the printing press created a world in which now there's a larger space in which this has to happen. Now, the internet is kind of messing with this, but what's so interesting also about, let's say, now the advent of the Orthodox in the West, in some ways, and you can hear Richard Rowland talk about this, pre-Council of Trent, Catholicism has some similarities to Orthodoxy, because the East didn't really have to wrangle with the Protestant church the way the Catholics did.
Yeah, they didn't have to opponent process. I mean, this is
right.
Absolutely.
And so now the Orthodox come in, and where are they in this mess? Well,
I actually think that Jacob has the best call on this one, but I know I'm not going to make any friends if I do that. But it's just a different way of being Protestant. Sorry, not sorry.
All right, Chad, what say you?
Hey, Chad.
Good to see you. Hey there. It's good to see you. I was like really kind of puzzled at the when we like have this strange thing where we say there's no way the angels would say that. And like I'm wondering, where do you what gives you the authority to say that with such certainty?
Because I can answer that, because I think Christianity is true, and I think that I think that there are certain foundational elements of that, and one of those foundational elements would be that not all religions are equal. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me." And so I think, any supposed message from beyond, message from an angelic being or whatever, contradicting that has to be false.
Would Abraham have said, "I don't think God is telling me to sacrifice my son Isaac"?
Well, I mean, that's a fascinating, much ink has been spilled on that. Of course, Paul has his own, gloss on that. I don't know if you want to go down the whole rabbit trail with Abraham in particular.
No, but I mean, I think Chad's question elevates the filter that we're using. Or why would God ask his son to go to Jerusalem when the disciples could see that the clear outcome of this was going to be crucifixion or stoning?
Get behind me, Satan! Right? I mean, that's right. When it invokes that response.
Yeah.
See, that to me seems to be the fundamental pattern. It's a God. I don't know. My experience with God and my really ridiculous and stupid understanding of things is the King of Kings, God, the ultimate, is a frame breaking God, and he will break. I don't know. It just seems to me like God will break frames just for who knows why. I don't know. It just seems to be the pattern. Makes perfect sense to me.
I don't disagree with that idea in the abstract, but I do just think that God has chosen to reveal certain true things to us through Jesus, through the Gospels, through Scripture, and anything. I mean, it says right there in the Bible that man is basically evil, right? Man is basically wicked. And so again, if the messenger from the beyond is saying everyone is basically good, you're all good, you're all fantastic, there's nothing to worry about, everyone's going to heaven. That's the gospel of Sarah McLachlan, not the gospel of Christ. You're in the arms of the angels, right? This is another gospel. I know I sound kind of like,
No, I mean, I think I fundamentally agree with you on this stuff. But there is a part of me that has to, it's hard to explain this, but part of me feels like, as grotesque of an idea as that may seem, to my human sensibilities, that the most dastardly son of a bitch could be redeemed. Pardon my language. Like as horrible of an idea as that sounds, I think I have to believe that that is a possible fundamental truth in God's universe. And
I agree, but notice though, that's different. That's what you just said is a very different statement from all people are basically good, because you start as a dastardly son of a bitch and you get redeemed. That is the gospel.
Well, I don't know if that's true.
I think you're being a little bit.
Nope.
I'm not going to go with you on that one, Bethel. Sorry.
In what way? What do you mean?
We are good.
For example, that's not the Orthodox position at all. That's what I call piece of shit theology.
Damn you, Luke, and your orthodoxy.
I'm not Orthodox.
Well, I know, but I'm just trying to make a point. Unless you want to speak universally for what is clear in the Bible and the church or your specific tradition, it's a different thing.
If it helps, okay. But if it helps, I'm also not a Calvinist. So I'm not an Augustinian. In fact, some people Calvinists think I'm a Pelagian. Okay, yeah, we go there. So
Good grief.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is just so ridiculous.
Calvinists are weird. I like Peterson maybe more than some people think I should, because people will. And I do think Peterson is a bona fide Pelagian, but I don't believe that we're just I don't have the theology of original sin that says, as you say, that we're just pieces of shit. We can't trust our moral intuition at all on the slightest thing. That's not my position. I think we do have moral intuition. I think we can.
What's the grounding for that moral intuition?
All right. I'm not. We're not going to.
We're going afield. I think Paul wants to get us back.
I think Bethel stated her position. There are differences with it. We'll do that. I think Chad has made his case quite clear and compellingly. Luke, what say you? What did you have to say?
Bye. Thank you, Bethel.
Thanks, Chad.
Hey, good to see you, Chad.
Well, I mean, you know me, Paul. I always get fired up about the framing of human beings as morally bad because I think it doesn't have an ontology. I don't know how that exists.
You're a light touch. I know on some of these things.
It's a deeply seated, unfounded belief, I think. Yeah.
Well, what to the main topic of the did you want to come in about did you want to just preach your POS theology straight?
Well, I do.
You have your own channel for that, or did you have something with respect to the bigger topic?
So the levitation thing, it's what I would say is all models are false, some are useful. And if you live in a divided world where you have like supernatural and natural, or something I'll often talk about is this book about the one-story universe from Father Stephen Freeman. Miracles are like, we don't know what any of this stuff is. Rupert Sheldrake has a great video on gravity, and Kale said something like about being in two places at once. Well, when you even start looking into quantum mechanics and how light moves,
spooky action at a distance.
Yeah, we have no idea how any of this stuff works, and there's a latent physicalism, materialism that I think judges the miraculous still very much within that modernistic frame.
And yet you are on your elliptical trainer for your cardiovascular system, which Dr. Jim would probably say that's a good practice for your health.
Yeah, but he would say a system is a system. It's a model. It's not what my body is.
All right. Corner citizen, are you just here to give us jokes, or do you have something substantive you'd like to contribute?
The jokes are the substance, Paul. Classic Calvinist, just trying to box everything separately, you know? Classic. Well, we actually did read Miracles in a book study at my church, which is great.
Really? Well, how did that go? It's not an easy book.
Yeah, I think we ended up getting off topic a lot of days because it's so hard to crunch through, and we just picked subtopics we wanted to talk about, unfortunately. But it did get me to read, at this point, most of the book. So I'm happy about that. And then some days we did have good conversations.
I've read that book 6 or 7 times, so there's a lot in that book to sort of try to think through. And it is a book from the mid 20th century. And I mean, it's aged sometimes with some of Lewis's books, are there. Mm-hmm. But
yeah. And one of the things I wanted to bring up about They Flew is, I mean, if we had, so with this being a miracle, or us thinking of it possibly as something miraculous, but if we had the scientific tools to measure all this and could replicate it, wouldn't that's not what we're talking about, I assume. Is that the point isn't to be like, oh, if he had a lot of body electricity and he was always on these stone floors that had negative electricity, and it turned out that, under the right conditions, blah, 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 blah. So I assume that's not what we're talking about. But the point just being of like, if that, like my understanding of miracles is sort of like Christ, God reveals how the world works, is like there's sort of this purpose in them. And so when we talk about did it or didn't happen, it happened to me, it's more important, what is it telling us about the world, or what is it telling about the world we live in? Because if it did happen and we could just get some scientists to measure it, and then it just becomes another phenomena that we don't even think about anymore of like, oh, Greg's floating, like, get the antibody electricity device, and so.
Well, I think it's helpful to think about the fact that miracles tend to be a modernist category. The New Testament name tended to be signs, because signs were, now again, you have to frame switch into a different worldview where these are revelations. And Lewis picks up on that in Miracles, that Jesus' miracles were not arbitrary. Jesus wasn't like, hey, look, I want to show you something neat. Let's make clay doves and have them fly, like something in the Gnostic Gospels. And there's a reason for the difference between those things, because Jesus' miracles tended to be these insights into the age to come. And they had a lot to do with, for example, Hebrew prophecy. Yeah. And they were setting up a worldview.
I think that's a great point. And it's sort of why I'm not sure about the whole levitation thing to begin with, because that's my,
right.
I'm asking,
because you don't have a Catholic theology of the Eucharist, right? The whole thing.
Actually, I do believe in the real presence.
I know. Okay, so then
I'm Anglican, Kale.
See, she's a middler.
Okay, but we're gonna eventually get to the point where we're gonna go like this. Okay, which is fine, right? So what is the Mass, right? For a Catholic, again, you could take me out of the equation and an Anglican out of the equation. What is the Catholic understanding of the Mass, right? The Catholic understanding of the Mass is a joining of the here and the eternal, right? It's the heavenly host. It's the joining of these two things. So when St. Joseph of Cupertino is levitating in the midst of the elevation of the Mass, it is to call attention to this radical verticality which penetrates into the immanent, right? So it's an explosion. So his screams and his yells are a sign, to use Paul's language, to point to this everyday miracle for the person who sort of believes in the sort of this Catholic vision, right? So,
Well,
so I
okay,
think
but
there
what
is
are
a point to that.
But what are the words of institution? I mean, so as you know, this is in Rand now. I'm kind of reaching back into my Anglo-Catholic childhood.
Yeah.
You know, the priest, he holds up the host and he says, "Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him that takes away the sins of the world." And at that moment, where are we looking? Where should we be looking? At the host, at the priest. And so,
or through it,
or like, but at that moment, I think that is the point of that part of the mass. And so this is why I'm skeptical that God would say, "Hey, look over at this guy floating." You know what I'm saying? And I know that, I mean, that maybe a little tension, but I just feel like, Jonathan Pageau always talks about attention, right? Like, where should our attention be? My thinking would be that at that point, if we talk about the Eucharist, because I also think the Eucharist is very important to talk about, our attention should be on the Eucharist. That's my thought.
All right, Alan, have we engaged your point? Because otherwise, I really want to talk about the mustache. I like the mustache.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the new me. It's the new me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's what I'm here for, to show off the mustache. A lot of friends here. I like this. Jess and Bethel, actually, we interacted way long time ago on T.S. Eliot, and I
almost didn't recognize you because of the mustache. I'm like, hey, is that you? And now, are you subscribed to my Substack? Because I haven't gotten
Man, get right to it.
I guess
I'm miracle stories for us too.
Wow, goodness, I'm getting comfortable over here.
I had to jump on though because my feelings are hurt here, Paul.
Oh no, Paul.
I get some credit here, because if you remember, about a year ago, I am the one who introduced the idea of levitation to this little corner, and that was even before, I think, the publication of the book.
Oh,
so I would point everybody back to that conversation that we had prior to Chino. And I used levitation as a little parable to try to get some ideas of mine across. And I'll leave people to go look back at that as to how that was. But I would like to make a comment about this, because I think this is kind of serious business, this idea of levitation. And I kind of feel like it. Well, here's my thought on it. And I do want to say I'm, as many in this corner, I'm a resident heretic. I'm a modernist. I'm not a reductionist, and I have my postmodern leanings. And in fact, I would actually think I move into the meta-modern if we can understand that. So I'm not a reductive modernist, but I am a modernist, and I'm gonna stick to that. And I'm not uncomfortable with that. The thing about levitation, and you talk about it with the idea of it being an experience that people have, and I describe and witness and claim to have happened, and I'm ready to accept that. I'm ready to accept that all the way up into including that these individuals had this experience. But the problem is that levitation fits into a package of beliefs, a set of things that come together and were very much part of the background of this era of the 15th and 16th century.
And Air gets into
that package.
Yep.
Included a characterization of fellow human beings that were worthy of being burned alive. And, I think that's a serious thing. And, I'm not necessarily one who buys the subtraction story as outlined by Charles Taylor, and I don't necessarily believe that those are the right framings, but it is definitely the case that is a problem. And if we don't confront that problem in the midst of talking about an event like, Joseph of Cupertino levitating, I think we're missing something very important, and we have to take that seriously. So there's
quick pause. I got to go plug my computer and keep discoursing. I'll be back in a sec.
No, sorry. So that's my point there. And I don't think the answer is easy. And I don't think it's also to be painted as a broad brush across one kind of worldview, perhaps a Christian worldview, because we can look at Jews as a human and put them into gas chambers, and we can do that without a Christian framework. So I'm not necessarily blaming this entirely on, or even only on a Christian framework. I'm just saying that this is not something to take lightly.
Okay. All right. Any interaction with that?
If I could just ask Dr. Jim real quick, so we live in a sort of a different moral framework in that sense, putting people to death. What are you then saying? I miss the connection between that and Joseph of Cupertino.
One of the properties, let's say, that would be attached to a human being that would be called a witch,
right,
was that they levitated.
Oh yeah, yep.
Okay.
Right.
And which is why the Inquisition,
now they had other properties as well.
All over the levitators.
Perhaps you can build a constellation that would say, levitation is something different, and but it's a package. It's a way of thinking, I think, or at least that would be my argument. And that way of thinking, had consequences.
And I don't know if you've read the book, Jim. It's a good.
I did read the book.
Oh, okay.
I think he soft pedals the witches. I think he does not really address that very, very head on. And
there's another book that I've been reading. Here it is. I'll share the screen here. I got to get to the cover. The Enlightenment by Richie Robertson, who gets into the witches more in this context. Now he approaches it differently from Eyre, but you're very right that that's part of it, and obviously a big part of the whole business of the Inquisition had everything to do with those witches. So, and because that's what the Inquisition and the Protestants, well, this is these are witches and they should be burned, and so this was
many of them were, it turned out.
What's that?
And many were.
Yeah, it's an interesting academic question about how many witches actually were burned.
Right, but I think Jim's point is that many who were burned as witches were in fact witches, is what he's saying. Right, Jim?
Well, what I'm saying is that people had the same kind of commitment to the existence of witches as they did to the existence of levitation. It was the same kind of commitment to the reality of that.
Right. Now, so what's interesting at the end, so Jim, what do you make at the end where Eyre talks about the iron box, Weber's iron box, as a kind of fictive frame that's pretending not to be a frame way, in which we've just ignored that reality of magic?
Well, I think I'm not going to be smart enough about that particular thing.
I'm not either. I'm just,
yeah.
I'm curious.
But we've been through a history, and the history that we've been through brings us to where we're at. And I think that has to, and that's complicated. And I have a perennialist instinct as part of who I am. And that makes me think that the burning of witches is probably kind of one of the very long litany of examples of man's inhumanity to man. And I'm going to guess that that's probably
but I think you're sanitizing witches. I mean, I'm not certainly sitting here saying let's go on the hunt, right? But I mean, what if it's true? I mean, what if witches are real? And what if they really do want to eat children? I mean, what's the response to that? Right. I mean, I think
my response to it is that the history shows that we moved past that. We decided that that wasn't the case. If you read the Salem witch trials, there was lots of regret about that fairly soon right after it. And I'm not sure exactly what you're saying, Kale. I mean, I do recognize that.
Sorry.
You're gonna promote the idea that as was seen in the 16th century, witches of that specific character exist.
Yeah, I think witches are real.
Well,
Okay, go ahead, Alan.
Sorry, just a little bridge of this. Trying to. I think that sometimes in the modern framework, we have this very clean, like, non-aggression principle of like what harm is or what like reality. Like, oh, you did this, you are responsible. You drunk drove and hit someone with your car. But I think with AI and what we're looking at, things that are not physical aggression, things that are not overt, like even things like speech, you can't say certain things. And what happens when you have a billion bots that AI-driven bots that can say a billion different things online and completely tank your election. So I don't want to, Kale might be saying something. I'm sure Kale's saying something different, but I think that the idea of just saying like this stuff never happens or this stuff isn't real, like we're going to have to wrestle with the fact that weird stuff and that's much stranger than witchcraft is going to start happening in our culture, and things like you can't think things. And
I am not saying that weird stuff doesn't happen. I am saying, however, something like Montaigne said, that if one takes one's conjecture, one is taking one's conjectures rather seriously to burn a fellow human alive based on that conjecture. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that weird stuff doesn't happen. I'm not even, as I said, I'm not a reductive materialist. I think egregores are a good description of something that we might call principalities and powers, and I'm all on with that. I just think that in the background, the moral structure needs to, include something that somehow overcomes the temptation to that end.
Okay,
So,
one more word
but
from
I
Bethel
would-
on Dr. Jim's topic, and then I'm going to move to, I think Jess was next.
I mean, two things can be true at the same time. It's basically my comment. I've read around a little bit with Salem witch trials, and I think I might largely agree with Jim that was a terrible miscarriage of justice. And I mean, you had this one judge who literally repented in sackcloth and ashes afterwards, right? Because he knew that these women were innocent. And
the judges were the ones possessed.
Yeah, I mean, and really wicked kids as well, who invented these stories out of spite, So it's fine to acknowledge that, but also I think witches are real, I do, and I as far as it's interesting to get into the demonic with levitation in particular, because I also think it's conceivable that demons might sometimes make people float. Did they make Joseph Cupertino float, though? I think that's a different question, and that we get into a whole topic of to what extent demons are allowed to oppress or possess Christians specifically. I'm not sure that that demons torturing and possessing Christians is a thing that God allows to happen, at least in that way. But that would be to kind of go far afield. But I mean, I guess to sort of address what Jim is saying, yeah, Salem was bad. I think we can say that. But I would not go so far as to say witches are not real. I think they are real. I think witchcraft is a thing. I think the whole demonic realm is real, as well as the angelic realm, which is.
Hey, just real quick on that. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it. And I might even, in my own way, believe in various forms of demonic, reality in the world. It's just that, how do we manage that? Paul said a few minutes ago. How do we keep it from getting out of control? And
what Alan was. Mm-hmm. So Alan was bringing up AI, and there's a whole. If you read Paul Kingsnorth, I mean, I think Kingsnorth pretty much believes AI is demons. I mean, he's got this whole series on the machine. I don't know if I agree with him. He's a very eloquent writer. It's very interesting. I've got other friends who kind of think the same way, but like AI is going to be this demonic gateway or whatever. I don't know that I buy that, but
Well, I think Bethel, point, which
It
I would
already
agree
is.
with, is that the reason we need to talk about this stuff and do some discernment with this stuff is that I think our whole functional categories with respect to angels and demons, it's very much what we're dealing with in this corner. We're going to deal with it with Hermes and John Vervaeke.
Yes,
We
Hermes.
are, these are things that we are going to have to deal with in a way that the 17th century did not deal with.
I mean, I'll
We're
just
going to have to
admit,
deal with it in a different way than the 17th and 18th century and 19th centuries did.
yeah, I mean, I did go and listen to that bit of the chat with Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson where John is talking about Hermes, and I'm just thinking, oh boy, I'm worried about John. I'm
And
thinking
AI is kind of a nice, okay, AI is demonic.
Yeah.
You have to really start thinking that whole equation through when you say a sentence like that. And I hear people just sort of throw it out there, and it's like,
Well, I mean,
we're going to have to deal with our.
Does it matter that the people who are architecting these massive LLMs and AIs and whatnot pray to the demons? I mean, does that matter? I think it matters. I think absolutely. We all pretend like it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters.
But do they pray to demons? Is that
yes? It's part of their process. It's part of their process. They admit it. Read some Terry Isabella Burton. Read some D.W. Pasulka. The whole sex magic tech thing is real, and they absolutely engage in it.
That's true. Then sure, AI is demons. I'm pretty amenable to, but anyway, continue.
Bethel's not going to be a hard justifier for AI. Grim Grizz, Jess has dropped out. He could not wait any longer for some reason. I'll let him in again if he comes back. But Grizz, that puts you up next. And I think the timing couldn't be better. You're muted. Corn. We can't hear you. And I'm not going to put a little stupid emoji.
The demons
with
got him.
I should probably bow out in like 20 minutes here because I'm
no problem. I think Kale has to bow out too, and I've got a dog here, so we probably won't go too much past the top of the hour.
Okay.
Go ahead, Grizz. Can we hear you? He's been struck mute.
The assassins have won.
All right, that puts you up next, Steve. What say you? You're muted too.
All right, my finger works. Oh, he's back.
Oh no, he's back.
All right, Grizz.
He lives.
We still can't hear you, Grizz.
Oh no.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Demons. They don't want Grizz to talk.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I didn't think we were going to be talking about Satan worshiping AI developers, but
here we are.
Yeah. So I'd put a question in the Discord. I don't know if it's not really part of this, I suppose, but anyway, so one of that was about it sounds like these guys who are flying around in that book were not the best. So they weren't the ones who had the most education, the most training, the most authority. They were like the least.
No, it's not some of them. And they actually weren't flying because that's
but levitating.
It's something that they weren't really in control of this at all.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I just think I thought that was interesting. It sounds like that's not the case, but what we've been talking about now is like witches, and so there's like the good force and the bad force or whatever. So there's people who are doing things that are miracles, but this is good. It's obviously the work of God, and then there's people who are doing things that are miraculous but scary, and this must be the work of the devil. And how would you know the difference, and what's the criteria to discern those two things? Seems difficult. And then also, even stepping completely back away from all that, there's still this possibly valid approach to all of it. It's, well, there's an explanation for it. That would be the modernist thing to me, is there's an explanation for all of this, so how could somebody be levitating? How could somebody have a doll and cause something to happen in a real person with that doll? Or how could somebody who doesn't even know me be praying for me and cause things to happen to me? or casting a spell on me to cause bad things to happen to me. I don't know. I think this is my impression right now, is somebody will say, well, that was obviously a demon involved, or that was obviously an angel involved. I don't think we know. I think we have to trust our worldview, or be humble to accept something on faith. And even still, it's like, as far as I have been exposed to as much apologetics as I've been geeking out on for the past 6 months to a year, it seems like in all cases, I still need to know what should I be doing?
Right. I think an element of this has tended to be, by your fruits you will know them. And
yes.
So time is an incredibly important part of this. And on one hand, if in the moment you are called upon to act, you're going to have to figure out what to do. But in many cases, and I think even Dr. Jim's point here is important, because we now look at these witch trials in a very different light, and even not too much long after that. And if you read Ritchie's treatment of the witch trials, this witch thing also comes about in the same period as Joseph of Cupertino. And it's the culture is sort of trying to sift through a lot of things. And so, and this is something that's unpopular with some people, because with the Vervaeke example, people want to sort of just jump on it and say, it's this, it's that. And I would say, I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, do we know?
I know a lot of people hear voices. I know a lot of people who've done weird things. And
if I could to say something about John. So the reason I'm worried about John is because I feel like John is kind of wandering into the desert without a compass, or whatever analogy you prefer. He's setting sail without a compass here. John is not grounded in the way that he would need to be grounded in order to not be vulnerable to,
and maybe that's
really bad stuff,
Well, but
as
then
a recovering
again,
atheist, maybe
John. So others,
John talks a lot.
of demonic.
He tells us all about it.
So, but again, and this is where you sort of have to modulate, because there's John, the public persona, who through these things, and then and I'm not making an argument one way or another. I'm just making the point that another part of our current internet fishbowl is, how well do you know PVK? How well do we know Kale or Bethel or Dr. Jim? I mean, we're also watching each other.
You're not transparent to yourself, man.
I know.
Bucko.
Word.
So, all right. So, Grim Grizz, let's do a sound check on him.
Hey.
We hear you.
All right. Good. The concern with regard to John is that he doesn't have any means of testing the spirits. And if he gave us some demonstration that he did, then there'd be less concern in that direction. I like what Dr. Jim brought to the table on this discussion. It's do you exist in a world where levitation is real? And everyone is just trusting the scholarship of this eerie fella to say these accounts actually happened, right? And so they lived in a world at the time when there was witch trials and people flew and such. And so then the thing is, what's the nature of the reality we exist in? Do people fly in it? We have cameras now, so theoretically people on the line could go find clips of people levitating today.
Yeah, and would it make a difference? We've got aliens on film, we've got ghosts on film,
and now we have AI that can make film that's more believable than film.
Exactly.
Speaking of AI,
and we're all bilocating as we speak.
Going to get us out of these mixes.
But if we
are we literally bilocating, Kale? Are we literally bilocating?
But verily, and seek, and ye shall find. You wanted a re-enchantment of you. You wanted a recession of modernity with the tufa formations of magic and the spiritual plane to exist again in your reality. So
I didn't say I wanted it. I'm saying it's happening.
and it's important that Dr. Jim brought up the time that's when humans start burning each other at the stake again. over what things are believing, and that he's a perennialist, because I kind of am rooting for a Christianity where we feed them to the lions again, and that's the kind of faith you have to say, I'm a Christian.
You
Are you
first.
not entertained?
Like, what, you're a Christian, sure, but would you be if there was a lion behind that door? And that's, I don't know. That's what lukewarm is defined as. And I think, but if it's the nature of reality that if we had enough faith, we could move the mountains, then a lot of our faith probably goes into this. I don't know. I guess the guy called it an iron box, but I call it like a mustard seed blanket of like, that stuff doesn't happen. Most of my faith goes into the notion that stuff like that doesn't happen. It's not part of my reality. And
this is where we get into, sorry to jump in, I don't mean to
please.
interrupt you, but I mean, this is where we kind of, again, we circle back to Douglas's concern, to the concern other people's expressed, and a concern I would express with certain specific denominations of Christianity, like Pentecostalism, prosperity gospelism. You know, a lot of miracles seem to happen specifically in Pentecostal circles where people believe in that sort of stuff, right? So, you know, a lot of Pentecostals inhabit a world in which people are faith healed, right? To use your framing. But there's lots of problems I think you can find with that. There's problems you can find with prosperity theology.
Was Tammy faith healed?
She might have been. I think God heals people. I mean, that's a separate question from whether faith healers.
That's more to my point. It's like the nature of the reality we exist in is one in which now if you're going to bring in people floating, and we can tie Hermes into it, then also you get the weird ass channeling I was into before I found this little corner, and they had this
I get
beautiful
back
concept.
from that stuff.
Yeah, like
Well, Grimm's point is it real?
Of the three people that were doing
no,
my point is
sorry, Grimm, I jumped on you. Sorry.
Of the three people that were doing it, one of them ended up dead. So from know them by their fruits. But one of the interesting concepts in it was this thing called the law of confusion, and that is what enables free will. So you can exist in the reality where like the shroud.
The assassins
the demon
have finally succeeded. Go ahead, Dr. Jim. You unmuted.
He had some very important.
I didn't have another comment.
No, he was just going to tell us about Hillary Clinton. Sorry.
What were you going to say, Jim? You had another. No, Grizz kind of the assassins have failed once again.
Jeez, he's so wily. He's downright hermetic.
Yeah,
relocating to different sites. The assassins are having a terrible time locating him completely.
The point is, as far as we know, I can exist in a reality where the Shroud of Turin is physical evidence of the resurrection of Christ, and you can exist in a reality where it's a fraudulent whatever, and those can both be actual realities, and we can still play in the same place together because of the law of confusion and free will. And it's instancing, like the way computer games instance scenarios, but it runs on the placebo faith. Never mind. I'm gonna go away now.
Right. I'm gonna try and help Mountie here. And CW would be really offended that I'm paying attention to this super chat, and I didn't pay as much attention as he wanted to his older super chat.
Well, Duxie,
but just for clarification, John Vervaeke, both on his Socrates series and then on a bigger video with Jordan Peterson, talked about the fact that he was doing some internal family systems work with a trusted friend, and while he was sort of imaginally working through the inner persons that are within him, another spiritual entity came in, sort of pushed it aside and said, "You're going to deal with me now." And John says, "Who are you?" And I'm Hermes. And, you know, as many have noted, and John, which kind of to my surprise, mentions this on Jordan Peterson's podcast, so it's going to get a lot of visibility, And so there are
Hermes wishes to be heard.
Hermes wishes to be heard, and
It's a big platform.
He's using John.
Sorry,
and
Bethel.
so we've talked about this. I think Sam had some good ideas with respect to this, but obviously a lot of people hear this and say, "Oh, what is this, a demon?" Okay, well, could be, but how Hermes isn't incidental, and again, someone brought this to my attention recently, and it's been talked about quite a bit, isn't incidental in terms of his Silk Road project,
Right.
Neoplatonism, sort of a perennialism. So we'll see. We'll see who Hermes is and where Hermes takes John, and to a certain degree others in time. But again, to me, this is just another evidence of the recession of modernity, that this is what we're talking about now. And we're talking about the relationship between AI and the demonic. And, Dr. Jim rightly brings up, hey, wasn't that long ago that we burned people at the stake? So,
and I would just add that my concern about levitation and looking back historically includes the idea that in our present world, whatever you want to describe it as, you want to describe it as modernism or some sort of evolution beyond that, very likely has the exact same set of risks that, not the exact same, a modification, an evolution, a different version of risks that might lead us into traps that have similar kinds of consequences.
Yeah.
And so that I'm not trying to pin it on, I'm not trying to look back and say these were immature or kind of primitive, and we've now moved to some grand enlightened state now, and we're out of the woods. I would certainly not say that. And there's lots of examples in which that, could be found, could be grounded.
And many people will, they don't believe in anything, but they'll say Hitler was demonic. It's like, oh, what do you mean by that? Demonic then just means another word for evil, but really evil. Oh, okay. And I remember when James Lindsay was on my channel years ago now, he dropped the word demonic. And I thought, boy, James, that's a really interesting word for you to use.
One more quick comment, and something that is a deeply felt thing for me in terms of my Christian faith is that this is a particular challenge to Christianity writ large. I've felt this for a long time, that the problem of evil is not a particularly Christian problem. It's a problem. It's a human problem. And so theodicy doesn't necessarily strike me as something that Christians need to spend their time doing, because, everybody's got the same problem. But Christian history is a particular problem for Christians. And so that is, I don't know how to answer it, but for me, that is an important aspect of this as well.
Okay. All right.
Piece of shit theology. Sorry.
Go ahead, Alan.
I don't know. Maybe I'm taking too many steps back, but Paul often talks about the school spirit analogy for spirits. And I was thinking about, to add to that, imagine someone had all the stuff they used for Spirit Week at a school, like the banners, the little activities, the hula hoops, and then they put it in a closet, and then that closet got built over and forgotten about. And then there was no school spirit for a long time at the school. They're like, we're just here to learn. You put on a helmet, you learn in the helmet, and you go home. They're doing an addition, they break open the walls, they see, oh, there's all this stuff that someone made for the Spirit Week. That's like, that spirit wasn't in anybody. That stuff wasn't in anybody. It was in the closet that's sealed away, that everyone, it could be 1,000 years later, and then they found it and used it. And in the same way, you could be like, okay, whatever, that's pretty boring, that makes sense. But in the same way, if you have, you don't even have to talk about AI, but if you have a list of how to make a nuclear bomb, that's not violence. How to make a nuclear bomb is not violent in and of itself, but you could say, I don't want to live in a society where everyone has the recipe to make a nuclear bomb. So it's like that spirit is, and then you say, oh, it's on the internet. Well, no one owns that, or it's in the AI. No one owns the AI. We don't even have to talk about AI, but that thing is living out there for anyone to discover, and then that's going to bring forth its own fruits. So that's going to come to the telos of itself, and let's just say it causes the explosion of the world. Everyone dies. So this thing that's not within anybody, that's around the world. I know that's like a very like sliced up and clean thing where you could say, well, we'll just solve it. We'll just look around and make sure that no one writes that down, and we'll make sure no nuclear bomb making lists are anywhere. But then once you get AI involved, or even like, can you even teach physics anymore? Because if you just teach someone enough physics, they'll eventually discern how they could make a nuclear. So it's like trapped in all these pieces. It doesn't look dangerous at first, but if you squint at it in the right way, you start to see, oh, wait, no violence has happened, no evil has happened, but all the makings of it are right there and could be brought forth at any moment. So like there's a spirit over that thing that no one's labeled it. Oh, I'm just studying physics. Oh, well, no, you're studying how to make nuclear bombs. No, I'm just a physicist. I just want to, well, which perspective is correct? Because technically they're both correct. There's this like hyperposition. So in that way you can have this. And then the AI doesn't care. The AI doesn't really care if it tells you how to make a bomb or tells you how to make a birthday cake. Sorry, I cut you off, Bethel.
Well, no, I mean, it's just this is sort of making me think, because I was dipping into the Tucker Carlson interview on Rogan, which you probably saw. Tucker said a whole bunch of things in that interview. But one thing he said, which was interesting, is that they were getting into AI. And Tucker was going, look, if we really believe what we say, if the doomers are serious, that, oh, this is going to destroy us, this is going to take over the world, do this, do that, why aren't we running around and destroying it? Why don't we go out there right now and kill AI in its cradle? And then that's when Joe actually brings up the bomb. He says you could have said the same thing about the nuclear bomb, and Tucker's like, yes, absolutely. And then they get into the whole thing about the bomb. Sorry, I don't know how substantive that is. I'm just kind of like throwing that out.
All right. And then one more thing about that is you could even say the nuclear bomb is good, but it's like, what spirit is that under? It's like, okay, nuclear bombs are good. And we, only the right people who in emergency situations, get the nuclear bomb, break the glass. We have our emergency, zombie apocalypse, and only the wisest people use the ring of power. And Gandalf puts on the ring, and Gandalf uses it wisely. So I'm not even saying nuclear bombs are bad, but to your point,
I think they are, but that's another conversation.
I mean, just to say, like, oh, sorry, continue, Steve.
Well, the thing that's occurring to me while you're describing this stuff, it's like, well, maybe that's why the solution is people's hearts and not the material stuff. So instead of trying to control what's in the material world to protect us, we should focus on the human heart and what spirit are they under. And I think, this is earlier to the witch versus the blessed priest levitating. Which is it? Or like the Ouija board versus the Eucharist. I mean, I'm sorry for such a horrible equivalence, but what's the difference? And maybe one is it's self-directed, it's disconnected from God. It's I'm trying to have like a secular argument for how something is good versus evil if it's basically the same thing, like a prayer or a spell. What's the difference? And maybe one is that it's connected to tradition. It's connected to what we've noticed and paid attention to and acknowledged for thousands of years as being in the right direction. Like this comes from a lineage of fruit that's been in our favor. It's been right, as opposed to a lineage of destruction, which we know is wrong. And so we can see that in each other. And so like the guy studying nuclear physics in order to prevent the sun from burning us up, or to make it so you can like run a car on a banana peel through nuclear fission, versus like annihilate the enemy. It's like the same science, but who is this person? Have they been formed towards evil, or are they formed towards good? And being able to recognize that, I think we need to have trust that we can recognize that. And I think one of the negative impacts of postmodernism is that we no longer trust. Like, can we recognize fruits for what they are? And anyway, these are the kinds of things in my mind, and the bias I'm applying to listening to all this conversation in the corner is are those kinds of thoughts and questions. And and I think that, you know, like, do people levitate is a great thing that kind of pokes everybody's worldview, that maybe they'll step back and gain this perspective.
Yeah, and Air is explicit about that. I watched a couple of his videos about his book, and he very explicitly, like, I wrote this book to make people question their frame. That's what he was trying to do. Is he was writing a book to shake the tree. And you know, to your question about prayer and curses, this is something I've been obsessed with for a while now, and I think I have come to, at least where I am right now, is that you have a choice. You either are operating in the realm of curses or you're operating in the realm of prayer, and it's not. There's no neutral zone on here. And I think that's the big trick of our social imaginary, is pretending that we can opt out of that question.
Right.
And so when I hear, you know, St. Paul say, you know, at all, you know, pray without ceasing, at all times be praying, I think it's getting into that, like it's one or the other there, and maybe people don't like that kind of binary, but I really do believe that, and that the trick, you know, is the trick of the Enlightenment, you know, as these books will tell you now, and all the scholarship will tell you, while the new atheists were doing their thing, all the scholars were busy basically proving them wrong. And it's basically, the Enlightenment is the unmagicking of the world, not like, you know, putting light onto the world. And so it's
one quick comment that I know Kale will appreciate is that in your comment there, Steve, I agree with you entirely, but it takes some character building. It takes some formation, and you know, everybody. This is Jessel like this. Everybody should read Dante, because you know there's a lot of formation that you can see happening in that, and he frames, particularly in Canto 27, he frames this kind of thing as going right back to the fall, and what the fall is the incontinence of the desire for undifferentiated knowledge, and undifferentiated knowledge without the attention on the good, and that will lead to terrible things. And we need to have this discernment, and that discernment takes some process of formation and character building, which I'm sure Kale is trying to do in his classrooms all the time.
All right, I am going to dismiss our three guests who have been here. I'm going to give Laura a chance, and then I know some of our special guests have to leave, so thank you for joining us. And Laura, you get to have the final guest word on this.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Okay, you guys want to hear a story?
Sure.
All right. This is fun because you can't find the story on the internet, because the best, most accurate, or most up-to-date research on the story exists in this book that almost nobody in the world has read, Hugh of Amiens in the 12th century Renaissance. So Hugh of Amiens wrote a life of the hermit Saint Juder, and he knew Saint Juder, so he interviewed him and wrote things down according to what Saint Juder told him. There are some other accounts of the life of Saint Juder that are not written by contemporaries, and those are actually better known. So if you find info about him online, they come from these much later documents written by people who didn't know him. But in this rather obscure book, you can read the lately recovered version by the guy who actually knew him. So
there
just
is no obscurity on the internet. So
yeah, just to explain why my version is not going to match up with what you will see on, say, Wikipedia. All right. So in the early 1100s, this Frenchman went on crusade, and he was in the Holy Land for some years. And then he was taken prisoner. And one night while he was in prison, he felt he was having a dream that Mary Magdalene appeared to him. And at her side was Bernard of Tiron, who was an abbot from the part of France that he came from. And Mary Magdalene took his hand and let him out of prison. And when he woke up, he was in France. So basically, he woke up the next morning in France. And so he went and found people that he knew locally, told them what had happened. And they looked into it. You know, it takes a long time to get in touch with people who are far away, but they looked into it enough that they managed to track down the men who had been in prison with him. And they all testified, yeah, we were in the same room with this guy. We had our dinner with him. We all went to sleep. Next morning, he's gone. Nobody knew where he went. And then obviously people in France knew when he had showed up in France, right? So the thing that's interesting about this to me is that normally when you're writing history, according to conventional standards, that's pretty good evidence that something happened, right? And in the book, the way this is an ordinary secular academic history book, the way the story is framed is just, well, this is what he claimed happened. And the author of the book doesn't say that it didn't happen, but he doesn't argue that it did either. He just kind of leaves it as like, well, here's the story, right? But of course, if you ask most people, most academic historians, they'd say, no, that didn't happen. If you ask them why it didn't happen, they just say, well, because those kinds of things don't happen. Well, why don't they think those kinds of things happen? It's because of the frame that they have.
Yep. And there's lots of this stuff. I mean, that's the thing. It's people are like, how do you know miracles happen? It's like, I hear stories a lot, and these are credible people, and they don't talk. I mean, I was surprised when John talked about Hermes with Jordan Peterson, because I thought, do you know what you just did to yourself with this? Maybe he doesn't. And maybe, you know, he is a very honest and open guy. He really is. And so he mentions it, but I thought, you have no idea. But if you read something like They Flew, what's so credible about the story of Joseph of Cupertino is what happens around him is exactly what the kind of things you would expect to happen around him. And certain authors like Frederick Buechner, who wrote the Book of Beb. So of course, here's this guy, he's suspicious of child molestation, and there's also rumors that he raised someone from the dead. And I thought, yeah, here's somebody who sort of has a clue about how weird the world is, and he's going to play with this. And so yeah, Lion Country, great book. Anyway,
yeah.
So,
regarding witchcraft, I could make a short comment too. Just that I grew up being told there's no such thing as witches. Did you hear that when you were growing up? Did people say there were really no witches?
Not in my house.
Not me.
I grew up in a charismatic home, so
Oh, okay.
My mom was like,
That's why you're so weird. Okay.
The thing
It
I
is.
learned about
You're
witches
making
most
sense now,
often
you know.
when I was a kid is just witches are imaginary. There aren't any witches, right? Then when I was in college, I went to a presentation by this guy who'd written a book about the history of witchcraft. And he said, you know, a lot of people think there aren't witches, but throughout history, there have been a lot of people practicing witchcraft, and they thought they were witches.
Mhm.
So why don't we think they were witches?
Mhm.
Just because we think that what they were doing didn't work, but they thought it worked.
Mhm.
You know. So again, framing.
Well, you know, I'm thinking of Paul Kingsnorth's testimony now, because Paul was a warlock, right?
exactly.
The male
Yeah.
version thereof. And you know, Paul uses this little sort of almost casual phrase in his First Things testimony, but it just chilled me when I read it. He said, you know, you can make things happen.
Yeah.
You can do things, and it works. I'm thinking, like what, Paul?
Yeah.
Like what? You're scaring me now. So yeah, definitely, for sure.
Mhm.
Well, in the Tanya Lerman book really opened my eyes to that sort of thing too. You know, it's like she doesn't have specific skin in the game. She's sort of playing the role as the kind of you know, the person from civilization being dropped into these various communities, and she's like, stuff happens. I felt it. It was real. I got burned, right? So,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, Grizz hunts down a lot of these things too. There's these three old dudes have their, you know, rather conservative Christian thing, and they're telling stories. And again, to me, the people out there that say these things don't happen, I'm thinking, why don't you look at the evidence? You people always talk about evidence, And the evidence is abundant, and it's like, no, it doesn't happen. It's like, all right, I get it. I get it. Lewis got it. Again, the book of Miracles opens with the story. The only woman that I know who claims to have seen a ghost doesn't believe in ghosts.
So good. So good.
It's just like, there it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to give Kale and Bethel, thank you. Thanks,
Laura. Good to see you.
Thank you. This was fun.
Kale
Thanks
and
for inviting me.
Bethel, final words that you want to make before you go?
Ladies first.
Oh gosh. Let me think about this. I
subscribe to my Substack. You can say that.
Yes, everybody. Yes, like and subscribe to my Substack. I think I would just reiterate. I really like Brett and Heather a lot, and I mean, they've been really they're getting into interesting stuff lately. They're trying to poke holes in their own frame to a degree as they talk about Darwinism and how that's failed. So I really look forward to interacting some more with Brett. I anticipate I actually am going to be interacting with him later, not publicly, but and so this will be fun. It'll be fun to kind of interrogate him a little bit. I don't know whether he'll read my Substack, but if he does, and if he and Heather decide to make a video about it, that would be pretty fun. I have sent it to him now, so we'll see.
Yeah, I want to just second what Bethel says. I'm a big fan of Eric. Brett, Eric too, but Brett and Heather in particular. I'm like you, Paul, you, Bethel. They're sort of wonderful to sort of watch, just as a couple, kind of processing and working and building a life together. So I think they're inspirational in that sense. So I'm a fan. But I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to really get into sort of the third man part of the conversation because
sort of.
No, I know. I just put like the idea of the third man, and I did a little bit of years ago. I was when I was doing screenwriting, I did a sort of a deep dive into the film called The Third Man. And
isn't that based on a Graham Greene novel?
It is. It's based. Well, Graham Greene wrote the screenplay,
and he was Catholic, of course.
Exactly, and so he's making a reference, though, at least initially, to a line from T.S. Eliot's *The Wasteland*,
which was in turn inspired by the Shackleton.
By Shackleton, which is in turn, though, for Eliot, it's a double image, right? Because not only is it an invocation of Shackleton, but it is also an invocation of the disciples on the road to Emmaus.
Yeah,
and so when Jesus disappears, they're looking at it. There was a third man here, right? Yes. So. Anyway, I think that's a really cool tie-in. Maybe next time. So
yeah, maybe we'll have to do it. I tried to get Sam on because Sam really wanted to make the point that the fourth man in the furnace in Daniel 3 was not Jesus. Sam was really adamant about that, as a universalist would be. So,
Unitarian.
By the way, great instinct, Paul, to go to Daniel. Great instinct, because it's a liminal book, right? I mean, it's the one that bridges the old and the new. It's just perfect. So I thought it was, loved it.
And then somebody, I don't remember who, said you have to talk about Tucker Carlson and UFOs. So Kale,
he's talked about Tucker, but not UFOs.
You should mention the event you have coming up, Kale. How could you not promote this when I
sorry. I'm bad at this, right? So we here at Portsmouth Abbey, we have a thing called the Portsmouth Institute, and we run a summer humanitas forum each summer, and it's a Friday night, all day Saturday event in which we bring scholars together, usually about some sort of theme. And this year it's about God and the machine, and sort of technology and theology and the interplay between those things. And so I'm super excited. We've got Carlos Ayer coming. We have Diane Pasulka. She wrote American Cosmic and Encounters. Tara Isabella Burton, Patrick Deneen, and then Matthew B. Crawford, which is going to be a really cool. I know, Paul. It's kind of like
you're killing me, Ken. You're killing me.
I know.
I have 2 weddings this summer, and you're right in the middle of it. You're just killing me.
I'm so sorry about that. But so anyway, it's great. We have availability. I think people should come. You can hang out with me. I'm actually being tasked with emceeing the whole thing, so a lot of Kale time there.
And it will be recorded, and you're going to have it done right. Please tell me that.
That's what I'm currently working on right now. So that's what we need to do.
It'll be worth the money. Charge more so you can get this professionally recorded. So
it's not in New Hampshire. It's in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, which is in the island portion of Rhode Island. and it's Portsmouth Institute. You can find it on the web. And come. It's going to be amazing. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm still in my head. I'm still trying to think. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way I can be there but I certainly would, because boy, Kale, you put together a lineup that I would love to see together. So.
Yeah, no, it's going to be amazing. So I'm pretty.
All right. So thank you all for joining us here. And
thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll give you a little bit of branding on our way out. I don't know, what should it be? Where's that? Oh, we can do the new. Let's just do some dog bark. Here we go.
I was hoping for dog bark.
Where are you here?
Oh, there I am. Hey.
Where are you? Where?
Got me?
Oh boy. Yeah. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Come on, Kale.
Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Yeah.
Walk with my mama.
Yeah, walk with my mama.
Walk with me.
Walk with me too.
You walk with my mama.
Yeah.
Walk with me.
And walk with me too.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus journey.
I want Jesus.
Want Jesus.
Walk with me.
Walk with me. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. All along this Jesus journey. Hold my hand, Lord. And hold my hand.
Walk with Moses.
You walk with Moses.
Walk with me.
Walk with me.
You walk with Moses. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
While I'm home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus journey.
I want Jesus.
I want Jesus to walk with me.
Say, walk with me, Lord. How y'all doing?
Walk with me. Walk with me.
Lord. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
I'm on my
Yeah, Lord.
I want Jesus
I want Jesus
to walk with me.
to walk with me. Walk with David, a little shepherd boy.
That's a deal with that woman.
Yeah, you made him a great king. I know David shouted for joy. He walked with David, and he's a little shepherd boy. He made him a great king, and David shouted for joy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. You gotta walk with me, Lord.
Yeah! That was rocking great, brother.
Okay, now we're ready. Ready for Freddy.
Ready for Freddy. Are your knees steady? Are you rolling in a Chevy? Are you getting it ready? I took the mic straight to the top. Top of this hip-hop game. No shame. Doing it big. Akon, you see. Ludacris doing his thing for Sugar G. With the mind that I trip, that I hit. I'm from the LAC, baby, Cali, baby. One love to the brothers on 3rd Street. Drinking their whiskey and gin. Read your Bible. Pray every day. That's the only way you're gonna make it, man. I'm not Yosemite Sam. I'm Freddie D. Mario Brothers ain't got nothing on me. I stepped once. I stepped twice. That's right, I got advice to make it right. I make it to the top in this industry. I think you wanna be like me for shiggity. My rhymes are fat, platinum tracks. Platinum tracks, always gonna get the rap right through. Forget you, I walked down a red carpet in case you didn't start it. You heard it now. Booyah. That's right. I do it alright. 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 Like sugar and spice. Like sugar tea and E4D. Snoop Doggy Dogg. Got the twist, smoking on a cigar. That's a trick. He got it going on all the time. He got the ladies in the funky fresh rhyme. But me, Freddie D, jewelry always by the pair. And I do not stare. I glare to the top. Don't you see? I'm the big daddy, coming hardcore, G. I be doing it all the time. Willing to bust a hardcore rhyme on time. That's right, it's tight, and I gotta go. But you heard my show. Peace out, really though. Good to go without a word to say. That's why we pray just to make it today.